Welcome to Art of Living Coronado. Our next guest is Coronado Islander, one of the co-founders of Casino Caliente Online, Guido Murguia, a 37-year-old UPenn Wharton alum and one of the visionaries behind the company. Hi, Guido. How are you, man?
Hi.
Thank you for joining me today. I know you are a very busy guy, then thank you for giving me your time.
You're welcome. Happy to be here. Probably a little too generous to call me the visionary, but
One of them, but okay, I know you're very humbled, and I wanted to talk about real estate because I'm a real estate agent. Then we talk about that a lot. Then for me, I will call it today is going to be about unmasking real estate, right? The good things and the bad things. Then first of all, I wanted to present you because you study at University of Pennsylvania, right? Worked on that.
yeah, in the undergraduate program. So there's Wharton, the MBA, or there is the undergraduate. It's part of the University of Pennsylvania. The business program is called the Wharton School. So yeah.
Then is one of the best universities here in United States for specific for finance, right? Is the number one.
Well, yeah, for the undergraduate program, it's famous for finance. I mean, the university is an Ivy League school, so it's pretty competitive. It tends to always be in the top 10 in general for the rankings. But yeah, the business program, since there aren't so many in the college level called the undergraduate, it tends to be in the U.S. always in the top few. So yes, but it's especially focused in finance and I would say real estate finance. That's kind of its main focus. I mean, it has a lot of other, it's mainly a full overall business program, but yeah, that's the main approach of the school. It's yeah.
What drew a kid from Coronado? Because you are one of the you born in Coronado, right? In the hospital here.
Yeah. Born in the Coronado Hospital. Yeah. Born and raised.
Real deal.
I went to Sacred Heart here, up until 8th grade. Then I went to uni or University of San Diego High School for the first 2 years, and then last 2 years it moved to Del Mar and it became Cathedral. So I technically graduated from Cathedral. And I mean, in general, yeah, like why go all the way to Philadelphia? I guess since I was relatively young, I decided I wanted to do some kind of business career. For whatever reason, finance appealed to me. I mean, probably my best reference for wanting to do business is that my father is a businessman as well, and he's an entrepreneur in Mexico, and in general, that was I guess what I knew. So in terms of once you decide you want to do business, your options narrow, and the most competitive or the top ranked or most famous business program for the undergraduate level was Penn / Wharton. But I mean, that was it's a hard school to get into, so that was my top choice. But if I didn't get into there, then I had a few other options, right?
But you made it, right? You made it.
Yeah. Fortunately, made it. Worked very hard. Had to be top. I think top 1 or 2% in the graduating class. Pretty competitive SAT, and yeah, I mean it was a lot of work getting in, and but it's probably harder getting in than once you're there. Once you're there, I mean it's obviously Morton's tends to be harder than a lot of business programs because you have they can only give a certain percentage of A's, B's, C's, etc. So you're competing against other students in a very technical subject, which like finance, accounting, they tend to be technical, and when you have a lot of very competitive people going there, it ends up being a lot of work. But yeah, so it's that's how I ended in Penn. And once you're there, you take on the culture of what people do there, right? And most people go into finance, like investment banking or consulting. Probably the most when I was there, at least I graduated in 2011. It was probably 70-80% of what people did. Almost everybody went to New York. I started interning in Morgan Stanley, just general investment bank. Didn't exactly enjoy it all that much.
I remember
So
you once told me that, right? Like it's like you saw yourself there and you felt like that life didn't match with what you wanted, right?
Well, yeah, I mean the lifestyle was pretty brutal. It's very prestigious, and you earn pretty good money for that age. But but let's say I didn't love the idea of going through through the 2, 3 years of investment banking. And then from there, you either get promoted or you get to your MBA. It felt like unnecessary, and like an unnecessary path for me. It didn't excite me all that much. So I changed strategy a little bit. And in Wharton, you don't really have majors. They're called concentrations. 4 or 5 specific classes focus on something. It's not an entire major. Your major is business. The Your concentrations, or call it like a mini major. And I switched it from I think finance and international business to finance and real estate. I just had to take 2 or 3 extra classes, and it was fine. And main reason was that at that point in time, there was a, a lot of new firms that were doing real estate private equity, which is basically investing in mostly commercial real estate. You take private capital, and then you buy things like hotels, shopping centers, residential buildings, office buildings, industrial buildings, like things that have rent, um, things that generate income or generate rent. So I was in that industry for a few years, and I mean, it was a great company. The founder there was the ex-founder, or sorry, was a co-CEO of Blackstone Real Estate and one of the co-founders of Blackstone Real Estate, which is probably the global leader in real estate private equity today. And he was quite successful there, and he started his own firm. And I was one of the early employees there. Great company, much more fun than investment banking, and similar compensation structure, which is good. But even then, after 2 years, I learned a lot. After 2 years, I realized that it wasn't really what excited me or what I wanted to do. So, from there, I started looking at other options, MBA, but I was too young for an MBA. I wasn't going to get into the top 1 or 2 programs that I was targeting, just because I didn't have any true leadership experience. So that's when, at that point in time, towards the end of going towards the third year, I decided I wanted to come back and do something that was closer to my advantages, which was taking my technical training, my call it business background, and leverage the network and the call it the advantages I had it towards Mexico, now being able to be dual national.
That's why you decide to come back to Coronado?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why we decided right at that moment in time. This was late 2013. That's where I realized that it wasn't, the MBA program for Harvard and Stanford wasn't going to work. Probably needed to wait a few more years. I was only 25 then, so I'd be very much on the younger side. And at that point in time, my now business partner reached out to me with his opportunity to basically create Caliente Interactive, which was an online focused sports betting and casino platform in Mexico. Think of DraftKings, FanDuel, but that was in 2018, before it was legal here. So it was it was new for Mexico. Nobody had done it in a regulated way with a federal license and done it at scale. Really, with a lot of marketing and a lot of investment, but it'd been done before in Europe. So it was pretty big in the United Kingdom, in parts of, in France, for example, in the Nordic countries, in Australia. So it was basically taking the same business model. We partnered with one of the leaders in the industry on the technology side back then. And yeah, we basically started from almost zero, and,
That's, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's like you are telling your story, as a normal story. But for me, right, like you study in Wharton, it's a great, or one of the best universities, right? Then after you broke with the system, what you're supposed to do, you didn't do it. We talk about it, about, Osho and about all
Yep.
the stuff, like you break with the normal. It sounds easy, but I think it's something great as a lesson for people that are listening. If you follow your intuition and you follow whatever you want to do, you can get things, right? And you did that. You break the pattern of going to New York in a hedge fund, hustling and working and working and working 12, 14 hours a day. Then you break that, and you came here and you start something from zero. And I think that was really brave. And I think people should learn from everybody that want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, again, we spoke about this over the last few days in different contexts, right? But it's or over the last even months now in general. But it's yeah, I mean, if you want to go down the more entrepreneurial path, you definitely have to, you take steps that it's not that clear if it's going to work. You think it's going to work, otherwise you don't take that step. You think it's going to work, but
Living in that known, right?
the way I thought about it at the time is, one is that you have to leave New York, and you're leaving we'll go back to a word later, to the rat race, right? You're leaving, up until then, I was doing everything perfectly by the formula, right? Good at, top SAT, top of the class, or, in the top 1 or 2%, you go to one of the best programs, and then you get actually a very good job after that. And, like the career progression is there. And, when for example, when I told my parents the decision that I made, they were like, why are you abandoning all, they didn't push me to do that path at all. I did it myself. You're there. Once you leave, it's hard to go back. No. And
Yeah.
my logic
And
at
it's
the time is,
normal, right? As a parent, it's normal that
well, I mean, my parents were pretty always hands off since, like, for example, the moment I got into college, I was like, I did this for me. So I told them, I'm not showing you my grades. Just, I'll accept all the help you can with, with rent and all that. But pretty much going forward, I'm doing everything for myself. And there's a more pure aspect of that, right? Because I don't know why I did it at the time, but I guess it's nicer. It's easier. I think you tend to make better decisions when you do things for yourself and not for outside validation. So when it became clear that I wasn't going to be the best version of myself in this career path, I kind of made up my decision and didn't really consult it with anybody else. But my logic was, if you're not excited about it and you're not thinking about it in your sleep and you're not like going out of your way to learn more about it, you're never going to be the best. And it is a very competitive industry. Well, finance, private equity is a super competitive industry where everybody is smart. Everybody went to a top school. Everybody went top 5, top 10 school. And there's not really a difference once you're there.
it's kind of that the story that you said about Charlie Munger, right? Munger, about the fishing.
Yeah,
No?
yeah, it's a famous story. One of his partners used to go fishing with him, and he lived in front of a pretty famous, well-known lake in Michigan. And every time that he went, he always took him to a different, and he saw that he always had this guide, and he was always at a different lake. And after 10 times, many times, he was like, hey, why do we keep going to, why do we keep going to these random places 30, 40 minutes or an hour away? And the answer is very simple. It's like, one is that I cut a deal with the best fish guide in Michigan. And whenever I go, he comes and he tells me all the best information. And after that, I go where the fish are, right? Which is, it's kind of a funny story. And if you know who Charlie Munger is, because he says everything with like sarcasm and very, dry humor. But the logic is like, hey, if there's fish in Lake B, I would go there. It's very simple, no? But really what the context is that all the quote unquote smart people, or all the masses, all the crowds are in the big lake, in the famous lake. And if there's, 1,000 fish, there's 2,000 boats, right? So there's a lot of fish, but it's a lot of competition. Versus in Lake B, there's maybe 200 fish, but no boats. So, your odds are way better over there. One thing that you kind of learn now I think about this actively, but at the time, I guess I was kind of figuring it out, and it wasn't all that clear. It became obvious later, but, pretty much, in growing up and in school or in everything, they always, they, I don't know if somebody does it deliberately, but you get a notion in your mind that you want to, be the best person at the hardest sport. And it's a pride thing
Yeah,
that
but
you're
I
going to,
feel sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes fear came in, and even then, you want to do something, but fear comes, and
yeah,
there's a lot of people, and sometimes I include myself. Fear led you, don't pursue things because you think, oh, it's gonna be too hard, or I shouldn't do it. Then what you did then is, I consider this is brave.
yeah. Well, I mean, in hindsight, it seems obvious where it's like, hey, in some ways I have the philosophy, right? It's I think it's a Peter Thiel philosophy, the famous investor. He's like, well, it's a noble, his whole premise is that it's a noble endeavor to want to if there's 10,000, if there's 100 restaurants in your neighborhood and you want to open the 101st and provide a better service, that's noble, but you have, an insane amount of competition. So it's much better, in business or in many things in life, the playing field isn't constrained. There's millions of opportunities everywhere. So, it's better to approach, most of the time, it's better to approach something with, being the guy with a gun in a knife fight, and just fight only unfair advantages. And, for me, that general principle of having an unfair advantage and leveraging it and being shameless about it is much more effective versus a lot of people, especially if you go through the rat race, as you call it, good school, college, good job, etc. When you do something that's a bit different, which ironically sometimes is actually easier, not easier, but there's less competition. Not always, but in some cases there is, but because it's outside of the normal way of doing things, one of the, your peers and, us, not in a bad way, but, even your family or your parents or something, your significant other, I mean, just whoever, right? It's a general example. They're concerned that whatever you're doing is not going to be successful and it looks like a failure, leaving New York, going back home, living with my
But
parents for,
that's the thing. Like
yeah,
we
yeah.
shouldn't. A lot of people that we shouldn't be doing things because what other things, right? That's one of the premise on life. I mean, premises on life, right? Like you should do whatever you want to do.
Well, I mean, again, that's another romantic notion, right? I mean, let's say it's probably better. You should do, well, it depends what you're solving to, right? If you love spirituality and you want to be a monk and you don't need to spend any money, then great, do that. But if you like to spend money and, go to restaurants, you probably can't be a monk, no? So first you have to know what
Yeah, I
you're
mean, but
solving to.
you follow you follow your intuition, no? You follow what you wanted to do, and you didn't listen, or you didn't thought about. Well, maybe you thought about it, but you didn't listen. Well, like, hey, what my parents are gonna think, what my friends are gonna think, right? Or what the
Well,
others
yeah,
are gonna think about it.
yeah, but I also feel like I had, at that point in time, I had an educated guess that had a lot of upside with not a lot of downside. So following your intuition is, I mean, at the time I remember I was trying to find a bunch of different things to do, and it's like, oh, maybe I'll learn how to make an app and program things. I probably wouldn't have been that great at that, no? So it's like, my intuition just said not this, but it's hard to know what to do.
Yeah.
And you have to be open-minded, but once you decide it, I mean, look, the way I thought about it, it's not like I was taking this insane risk. It was like, look, worst case scenario, we have, I'm going to go, it'll probably take me, I thought at the time, 2 months to, close out this. It was really a spin-off where you separate a company and you sign a bunch of contracts and you
Because
create the business
sorry to
plan,
interrupt you, but
etc.
that's the way that you see life, right? The question is, what is the risk doing this? So you
No, but,
see,
but for me, to be fair, to be fair, I was like, okay,
but it's
if
a good way to see it, right?
worst case scenario, I'll be 6 to 12 months without any income, right? Or without any, and then, okay, I created this cool project. It was, something different, something entrepreneurial, didn't work out. So, give that 1-2 years and I probably have a good story to go, to get an MBA at a top 5 program and then reassess and, go from there. Right. So it's like worst case, I knew I had that option. So, it's okay. People think that I went a little crazy, but who cares, right? The people that I really care about, assume that I knew what I was doing and I was gonna, do okay. So worst case scenario, I did a fun adventure and then I did something different after, and it was a cool leadership experience. And you get, you can, whenever people do an MBA, many times it's a reset, right? It's people do it. One is like if somebody doesn't have any business experience, so they, they're a military member and they want to, get some basic business background, that they do that. Or two, most people that already have some kind of business training, they do an MBA because they want to many times do a career reset and get out. They want to get out of consulting and go into a corporate job like an Amazon, etc. No. So I knew I had that opportunity. So if you look at it that way, it wasn't that risky in the grand scheme of things. No?
But that's one of the things that I wanted. Yeah, like when I talked to you and you told me the other day, that's the way to ask things, right? Because I don't think that way. I'm more like about follow intuition. And you said like the question is, what is the risk doing this or what is the risk doing that? It's a great way to see it, right?
Yeah, I guess it's there's a concept. It actually became randomly somebody made turn into a book. It's called but it's Thinking in Bets. It's a logic. I actually have it around here. Yeah, look. A poker player wrote this. It's I mean it's kind of it's when you're in in
Please, you need to borrow me
yeah.
the book.
No, but it's a basic concept that it's something in business school. I mean, a lot of people don't value it, but it's like, whenever you're investing in venture capital or you're investing in risky things, right? Where they're called decision trees, or they're called, where it's like payoff graphs, where it's like option A has a 50% chance of success and you get $1 million. Option B has a 50% chance of it happening and you get, $0. So on average, you'll make, the average expected payoff is 500,000. No, it's like a basic thing where if you go here, you go here, no? So most things, there's a lot of things where you have to kind of like decide where, are there things where the bottom 50% is not that bad, but the other path is, very high payoff. So that bet it's an asymmetric bet, no? Where there's a lot of upside and not a lot of downside. I mean, those don't appear very often, but when they
Yeah.
do,
You need to
you
you need to be ready.
yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, in investing, was it Warren Buffett? As Warren Buffett, I think. He said most people would make better decisions if you only had investing or buying a business or doing a life decision was like a coupon, like 10 coupons that you have and you don't have more than 10. And then you just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. And then when the big chance comes, you hit big. So it's, again, investing is a little different than other things. But in general, what he means by that is that there's a lot of things where there's an immense amount of upside, relatively low downside, and that's a sweet spot. But most people don't get to that because people are impatient. People are impatient, or when this big opportunity came, the first thing that human nature asks is, wait, why did nobody else figure it out? Like, why,
But do you think
how do I know I'm not the sucker here? No?
do you think in a stock market people does whatever others they do, or what they hear, and that's what they do? Because I feel like the people that they don't know what they're doing, they repeat the things that other people said.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's same thing happens in real estate, but in general, the rule of thumb is that, I mean, so going back, so in general, I do think people that are not 100% trained on this, even people that are finance professionals fall into the trap. But in general, let's say bubbles form because, one of the most powerful human cognitive biases is, FOMO, right? Or seeing your neighbor get rich and not you. So, when things double, and then the dot-com bust in the late 90s, perfect example. Also the real estate bust in, the 07, 08. And most of it had to do with, things went up and then some fundamentals looked good and then your neighbor got rich. So people started taking on a lot of risk. I do think that in general, people invest for the wrong reasons. So that's why it became a pretty good rule of thumb, when I agree with it on average, right? The saying for most people that are not sophisticated, in the sense that you don't have an edge in the stock market, that you don't really know what Nvidia does. You don't really know, how Tesla makes money. You don't really know how, Berkshire Hathaway, how to value them. So you're better off just doing the dollar cost averaging and putting it in an index fund, right? Because what does that mean? That means that sometimes you were very right. You bought it cheap before a boom. Sometimes you were wrong. But on average, you'll be okay. And that's basically a way of diversifying. One is that you're naturally diversified by being in, an index, but you're also diversifying on time, because sometimes you invest, like right now, there's a lot of arguments that we're in a very overvalued market, but, but you're also investing pre-COVID and when things were a lot cheaper. So, so on average, you were pretty good. You were pretty right.
For
And,
for
the
the
S&P 500 has returned 10% a year on average, right? It's probably higher versus historical norms, but call it, if you're making after inflation 5 to 10% a year, I mean, that's a pretty good day.
for the mortals, and they are listening, right? And because sometimes it's very technical what you said. We had this conversation before that usually for a grand percentage of population, buying a house is good because one of the rules for investing, I think, is, or for everybody, is that people should save money, and usually we are not good doing that, right? Saving between 10 and 20%, and but we don't do that. Then for the majority of the population, buying a house force them to save that money, right? That's what we talk about it, and that's one of
Yeah.
the things that you're.
Yeah, I mean, look, in general, the great thing of 401ks for a lot of people, I know sometimes you think, your view is that a lot of these are too expensive, which is probably true. But in general, what's nice, why it's a good system for most people is because your company usually incentivizes you. They do a matching or something, so you invest. So it forces you to save. And then there's a pre-tax benefit, et cetera. So it forces people to,
No,
you know,
sorry, but the
see,
concept is
I
is
know.
great of
Yeah, yeah.
401k. My problem with that is the fees and all the things that they
Yeah.
didn't tell
But
you, and I think it's kind of stealing people. Like the concept, I love it, right?
it depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? You have to check the details. But there's an argument for that happening in a lot of different ways, also mutual funds, et cetera, no? But
Correct. Yeah.
conceptually, with the basic concept, what's nice about that is that it forces people to save, and they don't really have a lot of control over over what happens, and they have to, like, they have some rules where you can borrow against it, but in general, the idea is you don't touch it, right? So it kind of has a similar.
And for you to say,
It forces you to save. Well, I mean, they don't. Your company is incentivizing you because they're giving you free
the
money.
401. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
I thought
See,
you
see.
were meaning
But
about
I'm
buying
saying
the house.
real
Yeah.
estate, when you buy a house, on average, is similar, right? You went and you bought a house, right? So one is that, you know, um, you have to pay rent in some way, so you're paying basically yourself rent. But two, because you took it out with a mortgage that usually it's 30 years amortization. So basically you pay down the principal by little over time. So that pay down in principal in general forces you to, it's people, revolve their life around paying the mortgage, right? Which means it's part interest, part saving. Tends to be more interest in the beginning and little savings, but as time goes by, the capital becomes the larger component, and you're saving. Now, on top of that, on average, in general, housing tends to go up, 3 to 5% nominally, as in pre-inflation, but call it 1 to 2% on average post-inflation, right? So not only are you A, saving rent, B, you're forcing yourself to save, but also, your asset is growing, right? That's the general premise, the general rule. But the tricky thing with real estate versus, dollar cost averaging in like a 401k or in general is that you're exposed to the time of when you buy. So in general, if you buy, if you bought in Austin in the middle of 2022, you're down 30%, right? So it's so sometimes you can get burned, and for a lot of people that would be their equity being wiped out, right? But what's an advantage, of using your savings for a house versus, versus just normal stock or savings, right? Like in general, the general rule is that the worst thing you can do with money is lose it, right? But in general, one concept that people don't have is the inflation tax. That if you're just sitting, on average, we've seen throughout, last 30 years plus, 2 to 3% inflation. Sometimes you get more, like in 21 to 22, we saw, 7, 8, probably a 15% jump over 2 years, call it 7, 8% on average, right? So is that if you just had that money in your bank account, it was worth a lot less all of a sudden, right? So a lot of times doing nothing with money, people think that the safest way to handle money is just to have it in a savings account, earning almost nothing. But
Yeah.
it's really,
Sorry,
you're losing money on
that's
inflation.
something for people that they don't know, and I learned not long time ago. Thanks to you because of the books that you recommend me. It's like a pretty basic concept is $100 today worth more than $100 tomorrow. And that's what people don't know. Like if you have, let's say, $10,000 in regular in Chase or Wells Fargo saving account, they're gonna give you 0.1%, and it's nothing. And basically with inflation, you are losing money. It's better to put that money in, for example, a high yield savings, right, account.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the most powerful concept in finance. And by the way, real estate is a derivative of finance. Real estate is based on financial principles, probably the most in the purest form, right? That's why, in some ways, real estate is cool in that way because it's, let's say, it has two things: cash flow and interest rates. So like what a dollar tomorrow is worth today, no? And it's pure because it's easier. Because in real estate, it's, in companies a lot of times, in tools, but in real estate usually it's, income is cash, so it's very pure in that way. So yeah, so in general, yeah, there's two fundamental concepts, right? One's the time value of money, that it is that a dollar today, even if you had no inflation, you still have what's called a real return, like an inflation adjusted return. A dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow, so you have to get paid for it. It's interest, right? It's a basic principle. Two
Well,
is
but okay,
also
a lot of people don't know.
yeah. Two
Like,
is that for many people that have access to projects, right? That, there's also an opportunity cost that, hey, if this dollar, I could have used it to create my new venture, my new, restaurant, my new gym or whatever, no? And there's also the concept of the inflation tax, which is similar. It's time value of money plus what inflation is. So in general, people want to make more, at the minimum, inflation, right? So at the minimum, that's what you want to do. Things tend to be easier to decide when what you can earn, an interest is above the rate of inflation, like we lived in the last 2-3 years, where, you were making last year 5% and inflation was 2.5%. That's a pretty nice return, virtually risk-free. And, you don't have to think much.
can you
Now that formula is
put an
changing a little bit.
example for people to understand what you're saying? Like an example
Yeah.
of,
Yeah. The way to think about it is that when you're buying a house, right, you're basically buying, in general, forget Coronado for a second. Coronado is a luxury market, so it's a little bit different. We'll get into that
yeah, I seen
in a
that one
bit,
of the questions and I wanted to ask
but
you later.
usually the right way to think about when you buy a house is you are buying a house, right? And that house generates income, generates rent, right? The fact that you are your own tenant, you're paying yourself rent, is almost like besides the point. But in general, you go and you say, you know what, I'm going to buy this house for $1 million, and the rent net of costs, let's say, you charge, 5K a month, but then you have property taxes, so you get, 60K annually, but let's say 10K in operating costs. So you end up getting $50,000 in net operating income, it's called. No? So what does that mean? That means that you're earning a 5% yield, 50,000 over $1 million. You're earning 5%, and it's that simple. No? So in general, when you're buying a house, the right way to think about it is, okay, how much can I earn by parking my cash? Let's forget about debt and mortgage for a second now, but in general, you're like, okay, if the government is paying me, 6%, but this house is paying me 5%, why would I take that deal? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense cash flow wise, right? You're getting 5% here, 6% there.
Can you be more specific for people? Like, what do you mean? I know what you mean, but when the government pays me, because you can invest
It's
in,
like a money market fund or a CD, right? If you put in a bank CD, it's like almost like you're loaning it to the JP Morgan, but they charge a tiny premium to what you're in from a bond or from a.
and that's completely no risk, zero risk, because it's the government, right?
Well, it's considered, I mean, with 6% deficits a year, it's a,
I
but
know, well,
let's say it's a
but
different story.
it's
But
considered.
in general, for example, if the U.S. government defaults, then we have a lot bigger problems. It means that I mean, there's nothing in life that's risk, but in reality, when you control your own currency and you have your own debt, what really means is that if the government runs out of money, they just start printing money, so you get inflation. So they default via inflation, not via not paying. So it's as risk-free as it could be in today's world, at least theoretically. At least that's how most investors think about it.
The conclusion is, if you, for example, if you get the risk, you buy the house, you renovate it, whatever, and you rent it, and you get a 5%, right? When you can put that money in the government, like in a bond or CD, like you said, and they give you the 6, then it's
Yeah.
much better.
Well,
No,
well, let's change that up. No, it's not
Simplify it.
necessarily better. Let's put it in today's values, right? Like today, interest rates are down like, let's say 3%. Uh, that's what you get from the, federal funds rate, something like that, right? So let's say the house is giving you $30,000 versus, so 3%, and a bond is giving you, or a T-bill is giving you 3%, right? A treasury bill, T-bill is treasury bill. And if you go into the bank and you give it if you ask for a CD, it gives you pretty much the same, a little bit more sometimes, right? And so the question is, okay, why in real life, how do you think about it? The way to think about it is that, owning a house you know, costs you X, and you get $30,000 in profit. And the alternative is, if you don't do that, you would have to rent. So you have to do that math, no? But in general, the concept, let's say that you're just being a pure investor. So there it's like, okay, why would you get the same yield, right? It's called yield, the same cash flow versus, let's forget about taxes for a second, because you do sometimes get tax benefits in real estate, but it just logic, you benefit from the formula a little bit. But in general, if you're earning the same yield, then it's like, okay, which by the way is common in markets like Coronado or Manhattan or London, or, in top luxury markets, it's common. But the main reason why is because people take a view that the price is going to go up more than, you know, more than
What I'm
inflation,
getting.
for example. Yeah, it's like, as in, you're not making money from the rent. You're breaking even, or you're making a little money off the rent. You're really making money on the upside, right? That's an argument why, hey, there's only so many things that, so many units that you can build in Central Park that look on Central Park. There's only so many units on the island. So in general, when you get these very low yields, is because there's a very attractive supply demand dynamics where, in real estate, there was a concept where, supply matters much more than demand. For example, if you're in a booming market like Austin, where, there's a bunch of, manufacturing growth there. There's a bunch of tech growth. There's a lot of cool things happening there. Even then, prices are down 30% versus 2-3 years ago, right? Why? Because in Austin is very easy to build. So, versus you get parts of California, you get, LA, where it's going through hard times in Hollywood, or, it's not booming like it has in previous, high California taxes, et cetera, whatever reason, right? So there, when you look at how housing prices have reacted versus the peak, they've gone down a tiny bit, if that. And it's because in LA, it's very hard to build. So usually, all else equal, when it's hard to build, you have a lot more protection, no? So that's a concept that you have to know, right? It's probably good for society that prices are going down, right? It makes it more accessible for new buyers.
But not for the one that they invest before, right?
But it's probably not good,
Yeah.
when you put your entire net worth in one asset, that's very dependent on local supply demand fundamentals. That's a much tougher.
And now that you're saying that, because I am a real estate agent and I want to help people to buy houses, and but mainly for me is to know who you are, and know what is your goal with that. Then, because sometimes people they shouldn't buy houses, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask you today is, what do you think is the big lie about real estate? I heard the other day the comment that you said, hustle porn. Yeah, I want to talk about that too, right? About how we go into the internet, or we read books, and you should leverage your money and buy, 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 buy. Then people really don't know what they're doing, and they listen 30 seconds clips. People saying things like, "Oh, it's super easy. Ask the money for." Then, and people they don't know what they're doing, right? One of the things that you told me the other day, and I love it, hustle porn, that video that I saw you, that I said, well, what he's saying is kind of true, but it's not true. And it's kind of like lying to people, right?
I mean, it's not that different of a concept why you get Ponzi schemes and why you get these like crypto scams. And, in today's world, in many ways, it's hard to make money, right? You want to, the usual path to wealth building for an average family, last 50, 60, 70 years was, you save up a little money, you put 10, 20% down, and you live in that house forever. And then as the economy grows and your local city grows, you have equity in the house and you have savings, and that's how you built that. That was called the American dream. No, that was the average way to do it. Now it's a bit harder. It's a lot harder for whatever reason, but housing as a relative to incomes has grown up disproportionately. You can blame the Fed or you can blame, investors coming up. It's kind of besides the point. The point is that it's harder to build wealth through your primary house than it was in generations past. People under the age of, what was it? It used to be under the age of 30, 40%, 40% used to own homes under 30 40 years ago. Now it's like in the mid 20s, so it's harder, right? So when that happens, you end up having a big industry in hustle porn. And what's hustle porn, right? It's people that are creating engagement with the facade that they're getting rich quick. In some ways, in some ways it, they're doing it just to get views and to get the algorithm to pay them money.
Or because
Another,
they sell things. They tell you, I
yeah,
have the key.
yeah,
If you pay me
that's
$1,000, I will give you
exactly
the.
that's probably the more benign one. The more problematic one is that they trick people into, they basically defraud people. And they're like, hey, it's the same thing that you see, give me money and I'll return, 50, 60% a year in
Yeah.
crypto because I have a formula. If that was true, then why do they need your money?
Yeah.
Well, why don't they use their own money, right? So the rule of thumb in general is that if something like that is true and there's easy money, why aren't they doing themselves? Why are they giving you the benefit of telling you, right? All this stuff is very hard. And the initial concept I told you earlier was that the best way to make money is to find a decent market and have very little competition. That's, in life, that's just, make things easier and is better. By telling people your secret, you make things harder, right?
Yeah.
So it's, so in general, be skeptical of that. And two, it is that hustle porn in real estate where you buy one house and you lever it up and that you use that equity to buy another, blah, blah, that actually did work for a while in, in the pre-2007 crisis, until it didn't, right? Then people kept levering up. And then when the price went down 20, 30%,
What you said
all their
about
equity.
levering your money is asking the money to the bank or to
Yeah, via
wherever.
loan. During the bubble, now it's a lot harder to get credit. It's a lot harder than it was back then. In 2006, 2005, 2006, 2007, there's a great movie about it, called The Big Short. I don't know if you saw it. Yeah, but it's probably, let's say, there's a few finance movies out there that are actually not BS, that are actually well made, and that's one of those. And that was mostly true, right? That just, Wall Street went insane. They took crazy amount of risks. They were just unaware of it. And or whatever reason, they're making too much money to look. And they were giving, what were called ninja loans, like no income, no job. The famous example there in the strip club. No, do you remember they were all buying? They all had 4 or 5 houses. They were sitting empty.
Yeah.
So hustle porn, they made money for a while, but what tends to happen when easy money comes, and sometimes it does come, right? But people tend to get greedy, and they keep doubling down, and then things, when they collapse, all your savings went to zero, right? Because people, when they double down, they see the person next door that got very rich, and you get the idea of why not me? When in reality, let's say the best investors in the world, they make 15, 20% a year, and those guys are multi billionaires, right?
Yeah.
That there's some cases where somebody makes
But
30% for
for
a
me,
long
the
time, but
problem
it's very
too,
rare.
the problem too is when one of the phrases that you told me, Warren Buffett says, "Don't ask your barber if you need a fresh cut," right? Because he's gonna tell you yes.
If you need no, it's Charlie Munger.
Charlie Munger.
Don't ask your barber if you need a haircut, or a similar one is, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Hustle porn are the guys, online selling you a fake story. By the way, going back to the other stories, right now it's very, very, very hard to get loans on multiple properties at reasonable rates, right? And the banks, they learn their lesson, and the lending standards are tightened, right? There's a lot of successful people that do use, that actually little by little, or they are good at raising capital and they build a portfolio. And if you have portfolio properties, you get the benefits of, you're able to scale management, and you're able to get better deals with contractors, etc. So there is a way to do it. It's just very hard and it's expensive, right? And
It's
again, I
not
don't
that
want to.
easy.
It's not that easy. Of course not. It's not that easy. And you have to be very professional. It's a full-time job, but that's there. It's very capital intensive, as in going that route. You either have to have a lot of money or you have to be good at raising money. And on top of that, you have to be good at buying. And on top of that, relatively well at managing it. Because if you outsource it for somebody else to manage it, then a lot of your economics are eaten up, right? A lot of the profit gets
Profit.
shared with too many mouths.
But what
But I'm
about?
saying that, but that's different than you buying your individual house, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So
But I mean, that's when my take was, a lot of sometimes they over tell you like you should buy, and it's not always that the case, right? And everybody's different, the scenario is
yeah,
different, the possibilities.
everybody's different. Again, it's like, let's say, I don't know, for me, let's just put in 2 or 3 simple buckets, right? Uh, one is that these aren't bad people, right? They're just, when you live in that world, and what you get told forever is that real estate always goes up and you should always own, and owning's better than not owning. And probably 90+% of the time, on average, they're right. So they're not, trying to, screw you over. But again, they're incentivized to earn
No,
the
I
fee.
understand, but
Yeah.
for example, in this case, about with my friends, right? Like I said, I'm a real estate agent, and I know that there is a lot of good real estate agents, and they're trying to help people. But sometimes there is
Yeah.
ones that you need to be careful with.
I would say that it's more dangerous the person with a good intention that still gives you advice, right? It's more dangerous because you believe them. So, like, for example, if your customer is somebody who's buying a house all cash, and it's not going to be a huge percentage of their net worth, and if it goes down 10-15%, then this person's a savvy buyer, and sometimes they view the home more as a lifestyle asset, one that, hey, this is where I put a lot of. It's not just pure profit and loss. There's also a lot of utility. It's called, a lot of happiness generated from it. So on that front, they're indifferent, right? If you overbuy it, you pay 10% more. Who cares, right? Nobody likes to overpay, but it doesn't really
But
affect you in the grand scheme.
usually, for the 90% of the population, that's not the case, right?
100%. Coronado is the exception. Coronado is probably like half the buyers here, but yes, usually that's not it. Now there's, call it the entry level people, the people that are starting to, start their career. They don't have a lot of liquidity. They saved up, through like 10 years of work, 400K or whatever, 500K over, 10, 15 years of work. After taxes, that's a lot of work, right? So in that case, buying a home for this person is, it's not just a lifestyle decision. It's a very heavy financial decision, right? And I always find it very curious how sometimes people can be so thoughtful and careful in planning their finances, but they can just be careless when they're making a massive financial decision where they're gambling everything on one asset that could burn down, and that could, could have in California, you have fire risk, right? And that you're exposed to local supply demand dynamics where they change the law and they make it very easy to build. They were gambling on interest rates going down, and they got a mortgage at 6-7%, and if something goes a little sideways in their career, then they can't afford it. And all of a sudden, when things go bad at work, they tend to also be bad in the economy. Not always, but so it's when things are down, you have to fire sale, you can lose a significant amount of your equity, right? Like, just to give you an example, which, by the way, it's more dangerous because of debt. So I'll give you an example, and let's use Austin as an example, right? Let's say that you got into Austin where it's down like about 30% on average from peak price. Let's say that you bought a house for $1 million and, it goes down 30%. If you bought it all cash and it's not a huge, and it's like not your entire net worth, you lost 300K, you lost money on it, but you'll live, you'll survive. The issue is if you bought it with debt, let's say most banks give you, 80%. So probably you put down 20 or even 30%, call it, 70 to 80%. So let's say that you spent all, 10, 15 years building, 300K in savings, and that's your equity. It went down 30%. Your net worth is zero, right? So your net worth, it's called marking it to market, as in at today's valuation, is not at a great number, right? So A lot of times, if your job is stable and you're doing fine, and you're really holding on to that property for 10, 15 years, who cares, right? You say, okay, fine. Let's say I don't
It
have
will
any
go up.
external.
It will go up.
Yeah,
That's what people
things will even
think.
out. No, things will even out because usually when something like this happens, people stop building for, 5+ years, and then the housing prices end up normalizing. And, let's say you'll, it could take a long time. Sometimes after the '07 crisis, it took, in some cases, over 10 years to get to, the original prices. So,
That
it's tough,
in this
but yeah,
case, will affect more the guy than imagine that he already has a house and he leveraged that money to buy another one and rent it. That guy will be a screw, right?
yes.
Because
Yeah.
he is
Yeah, like
expecting that
the
money
guy,
to
the
pay
guy that
that.
was doing the whole Airbnb play there, that, for example, like was able to somehow, I mean, you can do it, but if they were able to convince a bank that they were able to get, call it loans, a lot of times what they do is that since you can get a loan on a primary and secondary, they just squeeze all the cash that they can out from their primary house, use that, buy a new one, and then they end up doing personal guarantees. But call it, you end up putting everything under one bucket, right?
Yeah.
But it's not as easy as it was in '05, '06. Is it just for the average person? If you're a big institution, it's a different story. If you're, Blackstone, you have almost
Yeah.
unlimited access to debt, right? So, but I'm saying in general, for the mom and pop shop, you have to go and cut a deal with your local bank, and they tend to be more conservative than the local banks aren't stupid. They're giving loans assuming that protecting themselves for the, what if it goes down 20%? They're smart people, right? But yes, what ends up happening is a lot of times when people build up these portfolios using, call it lending tricks, they end up going into a gray area or even dark gray, where, where they start getting into expensive debt, hard money loans and things like that. People that are not banks, but they're outside the banking system and they're more expensive. So when things are going up, everybody looks like a genius. But when things are going down, you have to start selling houses to pay down debt. That's where things can go to zero very quickly. And
And I
then,
think that's a good, like you said, when everything is going up, everybody looks like a genius. But I think you should measure the business guy or women, whatever. You should measure how they're doing in the downside when things are growing, right? I think
yeah, I
it's,
mean, it's, what was it? Again, going back to Warren Buffett, right? It's like rule number one is never lose money. Rule number two is never forget rule number one. There's a concept in casinos. It's called the gambler's ruin. Like, for example, if you have a coin flip, right, and then you win heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, right? So on average, you'll win half the time, right? 50% of the time. But what ends up happening is that, let's say, somebody with a big bankroll always has an advantage, because sometimes you can get a bad streak, 10 tails in a row, and all the money that you had, boom, it's gone. It's zero, right? So there, the person who could keep funding, who has more funding ability, is able to ride the bad times out, and then you just let it average out, no?
that's
So,
a great, yeah.
but the average person,
He
doesn't
lost the
have
money.
that ability. He lost some money, and you're starting from zero. All that 10, 15 years of hard work, nobody cares. It's gone. It's gone, and you're screwed, right? That's why it's when we first started talking about this a few months ago. It's like, for me, when you're dealing with your not luxury money, call it, net worth that you have to be careful with, you always have to assume that things will go down 30% and you lose your job. How can you manage that? Can you be okay? Let's say, it's is it something that, it won't cost you your marriage, or, that you're not going to have to, do something dramatic? If no, then okay, then you have more cushion. You can take more risk. But in general, the downside of real estate, as done sometimes with people, is that they put their entire net worth into a physical structure in a small location, that there's a lot of variables outside of their control that can affect you, right? So in that case, if you're in that scenario where if your housing price goes down 20+%, and you're in real big trouble, then in that case, you're like, okay, you probably should be renting
And that's a good
until you,
rule. Like, do
yeah,
not invest in something that you can't afford to lose. So if that investment, you lose 20, 30% of the stock market drops, you can still afford to pay
yeah,
that, right?
like, for
It's a good
example,
rule.
if you have a lot of savings elsewhere, you have cash savings, etc., and you lose your job, but you're able to keep paying your mortgage and you're paid happily, and because you like where you live, blah blah, and you don't, then that's a different story, no? But in general, when let's say, I mean, it just, I mean, it's that chart that I sent you the other day, right? That it's let's say
The one that the millionaires, those.
yeah, how like people's
Do you want me?
how
I
much of
can.
their
Do
savings.
you want me to try
If you want
put it?
to, or you can just, but yeah, so in general, it's
Let
the
me.
worst thing is to put your money in a depreciating asset, right? That's probably
Is this one
yeah,
right?
yeah. So for example, it's by percentiles. The main logic here is, it's not, you know, real estate isn't the only way to wealth, right? Most people earned it, in a different way. And the very savvy people, the people would call it higher net worths, they don't put a massive amount towards real estate.
This one is the 1 billion or more, right?
Yeah, it's like nothing. Like it's basically the Larry Ellisons of the world. Yes, he owns a private island, but it's like, less than 1% of his net worth, right?
What's a primary residence, right? Yeah,
I mean, there's only
primary.
how many houses can you have, right? You can't, can you have 5? Can you have 10? You probably can't have 10, right? A hotel's more convenient. But what I'm getting at is that it's not necessarily the only way to wealth, right? You can also, there's a lot of, in recent years, pretty much being exposed to stock market was a better way to wealth. Now, is it the better way tomorrow? I mean, it's tough to know because the stock market's at historic levels, and usually the higher you buy, the harder it is to make money,
Yeah,
right?
because
That's usually
timing
the
is everything too, right? Time is one of the best.
no, because let's say it goes back to the original premise, right? If you're buying a house that's making $50,000 a year in cash flow, and you own it for and you buy it for $1 million, all else equal, let's say no growth, anything, you'll make the money back in 20 years, right? Like 50,000 times 20. But if you buy it for 2 million, then all else equal, then it's going to take 40 years, right? So your average return is half, right? So at what price you buy matters arguably just as much, right?
Yeah, is something that I learned too in the stock in the book that I read. It's called the John Bogle book. Is he explains about the timing when you buy something, right? Like you said, if you buy something, and that's what happened a lot of times in the stock market on real estate, then people just randomly they decide to buy something and it's here and suddenly goes all the way here, right? And they make a lot of money without studying, without knowing, just because they did that, right? Then, but if you bought over here, then you are not going to make that amount of money. That's why timing is so important.
Yeah, but it's very hard to time though, right? That
And of
that
course,
goes
yes,
back
yes,
to
yes.
like, yeah,
Yeah, I know, but
that
I mean,
it
timing is
goes back
important.
to, yeah.
It's really difficult or maybe impossible to know when and but it's important when you buy.
I mean, for me, there's like, one is if I were to tell you, what I know the housing market's going to do in the next, 5 years, I'd be lying, right? So somebody tells you what's going to happen to interest rates, they'd be lying, beyond what the best guess is from the markets, right? If they knew, they'd be billionaires, right? So, I mean, if a billionaire who does that tells you, believe him, right? But for the most part, most mortals, we don't know, right? So, but there's things where where you have margin of error, right? When that ratio of rent to the price to buy is very out of proportion, like it is today in many cases, okay, the downside is probably hard. It's probably bigger than the upside versus other times, right? Same, in the stock market, similar things are happening right now where, it's, let's say if you buy Nvidia or you buy even the S&P 500, a lot of things have to go very well and you don't have what's called a margin of error. So in times like these, it's very hard, right? I mean, there's still pocket, but that's why people started doing a lot of other stuff. It's called like things like private credit or even buying real estate in non-residential, in the areas of real estate that are still a little,
Struggling from COVID.
well, not even COVID, post-COVID, a big rise in rates. Most call it private equity oriented real estate or commercial real estate is very sensitive to the cost of debt, right? For example, if you're Blackstone who buys, tens of billions of dollars of real estate a year, really the driver of a good deal or not is the cost of debt, right? So it's really closer to financial engineering, where you're buying a property with relatively predictable cash flows, and you have an advantage that you have the cheapest cost of debt of anybody in the world, so you can make a lot of money from that, no? But for the people that are not Blackstone, for everybody else, you're much more exposed to normal lending. What you're in, what the life insurance companies lend you at, or a local bank. So when the cost of debt goes up, like it did dramatically post 2022, then a lot of the properties run into cash flow problems, and the buyer seller dynamic changes, right? So if you're the big company, you don't really run into cash flow problems because you have a lot of money you could rescue your property with, no? But if you're in the medium side, the mom and the more call it the more medium-sized development, then there's people that don't have access to liquidity, and they may have to fire sale and get whatever equity they have left. Or they had this big redevelopment project, and the debt ate up all the excess cash flow that they had, so they don't have the money to redevelop it. So they have no path to the upside anymore. So they're happy just to get out and get their money back. So there is opportunities there, but they're just more complicated to get to. Yeah, I mean,
What
the difficult thing about residential house, about like single family housing, is that it's a very easy thing to buy for everybody, right? Pretty much, the every bank will lend most people money to buy a primary home, assuming they have the income, and some people buy two or three because it's very easy for them to understand, right? They understand their neighborhood, they understand that. So what ends up happening is that you have a lot of competition to buy, a lot of money chasing not so many assets, and they tend to be more expensive, right? So they tend, the whole logic of low competition doesn't apply. Again, it's a different story when you're buying a home because it's your lifestyle, it's your family home for 20, 30 years, and it happens to be better than putting money in the bank, right?
Yeah.
That's a different story, but I think
one
that's,
one of the things
yeah.
that I don't want to miss is about something that you said the other day when we talked. Is that explain what, and just because something has tax advantage doesn't mean you should buy it.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah. It's like when people don't really know how taxes work and all that, it's a lot of times like, we should buy this because it's tax deductible, right? So all that means is, I mean, just because you got, call it, depending on your tax rate, a 20 to 30% savings on something, doesn't mean that it was worth spending the other 80 or 70% of it, right? So,
Because
but when it
sorry,
comes to,
they push that a lot, and a lot of books and I read right about taxes, about like they push, oh yeah, just that's why you should do this and you should do that because of the taxes.
look, there are advantages to real estate from a tax perspective versus like, earning money via treasuries, right? You have things like depreciation, and you have a bunch of other stuff, right? There's, if you want to sell a property, there's the 1031 where you can exchange it. You can keep exchanging and never pay a capital gain. So there is advantages to real estate, but it doesn't mean you should buy dumb, as in really what it
Well, what
means
I
is
mean
that,
is when people, I mean this more specific for people that they don't know what to do with that money, and because they read this, they think without knowing they should do it. Like, hey, be careful. Like, yeah, you can save taxes, but can you do it? And
but
that's the thing. Can you
I
do
mean,
it? You should do it.
most of the time, the advantages you get from owning real estate are the tax advantages. One is that really the right way to think about things usually is on an after-tax return. So again, let's pretend that we have both examples. The commercial, but by the way, this really only applies to commercial real estate, not single-family residential, right? But let's say single family, you get a mortgage deduction, you get small stuff, but really in general, it's like if you buy a house with 5 units to rent, you have things like depreciation and things that you can, write off, like you get a tax discount. But really what it means is that, let's say again, one option A was giving you, government was paying you, just to keep it simple, 5%. But option B, you were earning, you're earning 5% from the real estate project. Option A has probably a higher tax rate, right? You have to, net of tax, you're not earning 5, you're earning, I don't know, 3. So versus in real estate, net of tax, you're not earning 5, you're earning 4, right? So now it's like, okay, I'm earning 4 here, but here I'm earning 3. So, okay, your earning is that 1% difference enough? In some cases, yes, some cases, no. But for example, if you do something and it has a tax advantage, but you buy it at 4% and you're net 3, when the government you bought it at 5 and you're net 3, then okay, the tax advantage didn't make up for it. So it helps you a little bit. It allows you to pay a little bit more. And in some cases, the difference can become very big over time. But usually to get that benefit, you have to hold things indefinitely, because if you sell it, all the tax advantage that you got, most of it is called recapture, right? You have to pay a tax. You pretty much have to give that tax benefit back when you sell. So most people, to not do that, they do these exchanges, which very much, yeah, they're obviously very
Or
powerful.
best thing you can do if you can do it is like just don't sell it and keep
Yeah,
moving.
but again, you get a similar, let's say you get a similar benefit from owning a stock. If you don't sell, you never pay tax. The difference is that real estate, you get the cash flow benefit, right,
Yeah.
from the depreciation. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, in general, the best way to compound things, if you buy a great asset and you never need to sell, that's usually the best way. You save on broker fees, you save on, taxes, etc. Just in real estate, there is an advantage from the cash flow component. It's very powerful lobbyists allow that. But those are the rules. So
And
you got to use the rules to your advantage.
one of the things that to talk about Coronado is like it's equivalent. One of the phrases that you said is to buying art, right? Because the market here is another. No.
Yeah, it's a bit of a, this isn't in general, the normal way, the academic way to look at overall real estate, no? Where you look at how much you earn in rent, how much, normal supply demand fundamentals. But when you go to trophy real estate, again, think of Coronado, which I think, you're on an island, think on, the ocean in La Jolla or in Del Mar, or, very, very high end properties. So one is that the supply dynamics still matter. So is it easy to build? Yes or no? In the case that no, then really what determines price is who are the people buying, right? So for example, during COVID, Coronado went up a lot. There's a lot of wealthy out of town people, whether it came from Mexico City or from the Bay Area, San Francisco or LA. And, these people were buying cash. So, overpaying for a lot, 50,
Those rules, they don't
500,000, a
apply for
million.
them, right? Those people.
Yeah, it's like, because it's such a low percentage of their net worth that, they find the perfect lot, they have more preference for that. But what's funny about this is that usually, when very well-off people are aligned in liking something, think of Aspen real estate or yeah, we're going back to Central Park, they don't buy it for economic reasons necessarily, but if there's a network effect where they all like it and they all congregate and they want to be there more, then the price tends to go up, right? So it's again, it's like art in that way, but it's rare, right? Coronado's, probably like the oceanfront real estate in Coronado is probably the closest thing to that, but in general, that still applies. But it's like probably a more extreme versions, like what you see out of Miami in they call it the Billionaire's Island, where now they're buying the properties for $200 million there. So it's like, what matters is your best guess on seeing how it's valued is understanding how Jeff Bezos is thinking, right?
Yeah.
But it's a different story. There's not even a concept of rent. It's not like, there's nobody rents their houses there. So it's like you're guessing how well the market will do for those billionaires and how they're thinking, So it's not as extreme here. Maybe on beachfront, Del Mar or La Jolla property it is, or a few areas here on Ocean Boulevard. But yeah, it's usually it's a whole different set of rules. If it goes out of vogue, so just like you can get a lot of benefit from the billionaire sentiment, if the billionaire sentiment says, actually, Coronado or San Diego is too boring for me, I like all the energy in Silicon Valley. So just like it can go like this very quickly, it can go like that very quickly. So, if there's the next sexy project or the next sexy gathering area, it can invert very quickly. But,
And yeah, we're finishing here. Then what is your favorite part of living in Coronado? One of the things that you love. You born here, you live, you grow up here.
yeah, one, it's home, right? So you always, I've had a lot of friends that have from here in San Diego that were in Coronado and moved, elsewhere. There's more space, etc. But the bias of being home is always big. My parents live here too. Two is, with I like the beach vibe that you probably have only in a few other areas in San Diego. I like that there's a pretty healthy, dual national community as well. I like that you can bike everywhere and you can really, yeah, it's very kid friendly. I have 3 young kids, so it's very kid friendly getting around. There's a sense of small town community. Obviously, it's very safe. There's a great police force and people here in general versus a lot of other neighborhoods in San Diego have a sense of community. So, all your neighbors' names.
Yeah, I love that. I
If you
said it the other day, but my kid, he goes to in the street, say, "What's up, Jason? Jason, what's up?" He's
Yeah,
saying hi,
it
everybody.
feels it
And
feels
I love
very
that.
it feels very old school. There probably aren't that many communities left like that in the US, as crazy as it sounds, right? I mean, for that matter, in many places in the world. So
It's kind
yeah,
of
it's
sad.
high quality. Yeah, it is kind of sad. High quality of life, small town feel, but yet you have the big town right across the bridge. Yeah, so and it's one of the best places to enjoy the San Diego weather.
What is your favorite restaurant here on the island?
Okay, it depends for what. For date night, I think it's probably steak. That's where I tend to go with my wife. You know, with the kids, I mean, I like going a lot to Buena Forqueta. They have a lot of super nice people there that always help us out. Um, uh, if I have guests from out of town that just want to see a nice view, I take them to the cottage and in the Hotel Del. I mean, we have the Nobilo just added, so I mean, there's a lot of uh, you have cereal, which is also a great fish. So yeah, probably depending on the situation, that's
That's good. That's good to know. It's great. I think it's good that you are choosing different places because people that they are not from here or they are thinking to come here,
yeah.
they already know.
We didn't used to have options here.
I remember.
Not that I mean we had a Fornallo, but yeah, the one of the benefit of having more people from outside of Coronado come and
I would like to
invest in
know
the
too
community.
because I feel like I saw the change like 5 years ago, something like that. Because I've been living here 12 years, and maybe I don't know, they let easier, like to build maybe the permits. I don't know.
Yeah,
I was thinking
I
before they
think
had more problems to create new things here, or they didn't.
yeah, I mean, my sense is that yeah, that's true. It used to be, I mean, 20 plus years ago, it was or like 30 years ago when Starbucks came, it was super controversial, like there was a lot of the community I think was a bit older and very averse to having corporate America come in and McDonald's and Starbucks, and so they wanted to maintain the small town feel, which I think it wasn't unreasonable, but they're probably over exaggerating it. But then as the community changed a little bit, it got there's a much higher percentage of young families here that still like to go out, right? That like to have a nice dinner, go have a nice glass of wine, etc., or even take their kids out. I think the community change, right? Just a lot of the people that came here in the 1950s, they, the
Yeah,
the
no, I
cycle of
can say.
life, dictated terms, and the new people are younger, and then in parallel with that, the leadership of the city also adapted, right? So like I knew the previous mayor pretty well, and he was very hands on, progress oriented. I thought he was a great mayor. Let's say open minded in that it was very good for Coronado to get more of these restaurants that add value and help the citizens, and it helps some helps high quality tourism as well. Plus, so I think that went together, and you had the fact that that coincided with a lot of the development, right? There was a lot of new houses that were refreshed. Then I think a lot of it has also been dependent on the Hotel Del getting really a massive remodel.
It's
There's some things I wish that they would do a little different, but
like
I'm not a huge fan of having these massive crowds during winter. I would prefer that they manage it so that they keep the crowds about the same throughout the year, and you can't really enjoy it as much as you would want, and it crowds the city too much, and I'm not sure they're even consuming all that much. Like for example, the hockey rink, the ice skating rink. I think they could do it in a more Coronado friendly way and still make more money, right? Because it's yeah, but that happens when there's a massive corporation that owns it, so it's hard to I get why they do it. It helps their food and beverage income, but yeah, I think I mean, on average, they've done a very good job in terms of improving the quality of the hotel.
yeah, of course.
and
And yeah, we saw the change, right? I saw the change here.
and And most people, like, I can tell you, for example, my parents that like going out 2, 3 times a week to go to restaurants. They used to go off island almost every day. Sorry, like every time that they went out, and they rarely go off island anymore. So it a lot of the local consumption stayed here. Yeah, no, and it's in some ways it's been very good. I think it could be a little better though, but it's
Step
step
by
by step.
step, step by step. Well, and last question: if you need to recommend 5 books for people, they are trying to learn about investment, to learn about how to do things differently.
I mean, it's a hard question,
I
right?
know it's a hard
Because
question.
no, let's say if you want to start from zero, right, and you have like no background.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds again. I think that's like a different question though. It's more like, let's say it's very hard to start understanding anything without getting the basic fundamentals, right? Like the basic fundamentals. And you basically only need to understand, you know, one basic thing. I mean, it's a book that you're reading, right? Like the small book about investing, or what was it?
The John Bogle one,
No, the other one. I
the little
forget.
book about valuation.
Yeah, yeah. No, but
That
in general,
it's a pretty hard book. It's really hard.
yeah,
Well, for
yeah.
people, yeah,
No,
it's
yeah.
hard.
So, I mean, there's these kind of like, call it personal finance books that are good. Like the one that I thought was pretty, good to read and for all levels. It was like The Psychology of Money. That book was interesting.
Psych.
And, but I think in general, if people don't have a basic understanding of, I think like personal finance, like called corporate finance, but it's just very basic things on like learning about interest rates and cash flow and basic accounting. You can learn it on YouTube probably. I think it's
Oh, and
difficult
even
to
too,
learn out.
like I remember you told me about all of these books, then like real estate for dummies, or or
Investing for dummies. Yeah, I mean
yeah.
those for dummies
But I
books.
think that's
Honestly,
a great tip. When you don't know about something, you need to read things that are simple.
people make fun of them, but I've learned some interesting things from in these for dummies books. I don't think you can read any book in a good way without really understanding the very basic things. I think it's a waste of time to read about a bunch of other stuff without getting that under control. And yeah, I mean, it's hard in the beginning, but then it gets easier. And, you just have to understand the basics,
And
right?
I think
What's,
too, the one book leads you to another and to another,
yeah, yeah,
and open two
100%.
more and three more.
Yeah. But then, again, it depends
But
what you
well,
like, look
I
at.
think
I
that
have a few
I
here,
think
but,
for everybody to
for
understand.
example, like this is one of my favorite books, but it's called Poor Charlie's Almanac. It's like basically Charlie Munger in his words, like in his speeches and things like that. And it really focuses less on technical things, on how valuation works, more like on mental models, like, on making sure that your cognitive biases are not getting in the way, making sure that you're thinking things through in a holistic way. It makes fun of overly academic approach to investing or business in general, or it makes fun of, and it's cynical towards the people whose job it is to invest, right? So when it's your job to, again, never ask your barber if you need a haircut, no? So that you'll see us in this book many times, no? So I think this one's great from that point of view. But that's more personal finance. Like if you're looking to do something, entrepreneurial or things like that, that other book I gave you, I thought it was cool and interesting. It's actually based the name off this book, but the Naval's
Animals,
Almanac,
yeah,
right? That one's
I
cool
finished.
because
I just finished.
it's very again, it's more philosophical and but
Yeah,
pretty basic, but it's not like it's a cool way of thinking about things, but that's more like how you create value with your time
yeah, but I think
versus
it's like
putting,
you said,
yeah.
that's the foundation, right? It's something basic and it's the foundation to understand. And a lot of things that he said, I already knew, but it's good to
This one's
reinforce it, or
interesting.
it gives you another
Yeah, again,
perspective too.
this one's also interesting. 0 to 1, the Peter Thiel book. It's kind of like his logic on, again, fighting unfair fights. You have to create mini monopolies, and it's very, it's a very easy book to read, but it's good. That's more of, if you're looking to start a venture, whether how small or big, no, from a local coffee shop to, something different. So I think that one is cool. There's also a bunch of YouTube videos on it. I'm always a big fan of biographies, whether it's like the Sam Walton biography is very cool, like the founder of Walmart. I always like these, like, this one's actually pretty cool. It's It's a guy who helped build San Diego, based on John D. Spreckles. They sell it at the Hotel Della. It's a really good book, actually. It's worth, but it's like more, that won't tell you much about investing, but it'll, give you examples of how different people did different things. And you'll find some people you identify more than with others. Like if you read the Elon Musk biography, you're like, okay, I'm definitely not him.
Well, but I felt like knowing more about Larry Ellison, I felt like I had, well, his bank account is very different as mine, but I feel like growing up, all the things that I felt very connected with him because I was kind of that person, like
Yeah,
Larry Ellison, like
yeah. I mean,
rebel.
again, one of the best podcasts that I think are on the internet now. It's called Founders Podcast. So that one basically summarizes biographies, and there's a lot of good lessons, like themes throughout the story. There's themes that come back. Every one of them is different, but there's themes that tend to be recurring. But what's cool about it is that you can actually, there's a lot of books that I've read from that. Like for example, like he did one on Bill Gates, and it was based off like a book written in the 90s when it was still much fresher. The Bill Gates we know today is more of the guy who donated all his money to charity, not the guy who really was ruthless in the early years of Microsoft. So that one led me to read one of the early books called Hard Drive, which is a great book too. But it's so it's cool because it leads you, it actually led me to buy this book.
Yeah.
It was like a collector's book on John D. Rockefeller. But it turns out at the time I thought I was overpaying for it. I paid like $150 for the book. Now it's like worth over $1,000 on the internet because the podcast made it famous. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so now it's like, it's kind of cool. I'm just gonna keep. It's like it's an asset now, right? It's an investment
Yeah, of
asset.
course.
No, because they stopped printing it in the 1980s, right? So that one's very cool because you get um, you get
That example right
uh,
there is like a lot of people buying a stock. I think it's the same thing what they do. They don't know anything. They just buy something. Oh, look, I just made this.
yeah,
And
yeah, but
it's
that's not
timing and
that's obviously not that's not why I did it, right? It
no, I
was
know, I
more
know.
like,
But a lot of people and they buy stocks. Before we were talking about timing and about then they bought something in good time and they didn't even know, they didn't study. They make money,
yeah,
but doesn't mean that that's gonna
yeah,
keep
which
forever.
again, it's, you know, before we have to leave it, there was one funny Charlie Munger quote, always go back to him, right? But it's, there's, there's the three L's that lead to bankruptcy or to like going bankrupt. One is ladies, liquor, and leverage. Oh, is like, and I only added the first two because it was funny, as in it's leverage.
Yeah.
Leverage is the only thing that makes you bankrupt, right? So a lot of the times, key thing that Munger and, Warren Buffett learn is that, you have to play the game long enough to allow things to compound. So if you bought, the Walmart stock, 40 years ago, and, you had enough savings and liquidity to have it, and you just held it forever because you were a big fan of the quality of the company. And I mean, if you hold something for 40 years, the price matters a lot less. Like what if you overpaid 10%, who cares, right? But, you know, in general, that I think that's the main lesson you get from these legendary investors, that it's hard. Let's say that if you buy a company and you're a super smart guy and you did all the analysis and you have like, a special way of analyzing it, and you think that the stock is worth 200, but the market doesn't understand it and you buy it for 100, So the issue is that 10, 15 years could pass until you get to what you think it's worth. Your biggest advantage, like these legendary investors, their biggest advantage is time and patience, right? So but when they see a great opportunity, they're impatient. They move quick, right? They bet big, they hit the fat pitch, like they call it, but they're very, very patient when letting these investments develop. And that's one thing that most people, I think, are not so good at, right? So it's so yeah, I mean, that's all these books will kind of give you all that
Good, good. Well,
rough idea.
thank you very much, Guido. I appreciate it. And, giving me your time, like I said, and hopefully in the future you join more times because I feel like you can share a lot of things to people. And this is the first of the hopefully, long conversations that we'll have.
Well, if people find it boring and lame, I'm sure you want to invite me back, but if people find it
I'm sure that
Interesting.
there
Well,
is a lot of valuable
maybe we'll be back.
information that they can get from here. Then thank you very much, Guido.
Let's see, but thank you.
Take
Good
care,
luck
man.
with the podcast.
Thank you.